I am your host, Tari Butler, and welcome to the Mom Keys to Mental Peace podcast, where we empower millennial mothers to cultivate a deeper connection with God, nurture their mental well-being, and prioritize family care without sacrificing their own identity. Get ready to unlock the secrets to mental peace and spiritual fulfillment. Whether you're striving for personal growth, professional success, or a more fulfilling family life, our podcast offers valuable insights to help you level up your lifestyle God's way. Ready to level up? Let's do it. So hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast episode. So happy to have you here. If you are new here, welcome, sis. So glad to have you join the family. And if you're an OG who tunes in weekly, welcome back, sis. So happy to have you back here. So we are hopping into a series on some motherhood topics today. And today's topic is called Parenting from a Healed Place, Part 1. So I'm going to break this down into two parts. I didn't want to give y'all too much information in the first episodes where it's like information overload. So we're going to break it down in Part 1 today, and then I'll do Part 2 next week. So again, today's topic is parenting from a healed place, okay? So what it means to be healed means that you become sound or healthy again, which means to mend or restore. So in order for you to be healed, it means that something was harmed before, or something was hurt before it was healed. So to become sound or healthy again, or to mend or restore. So a sign of a healed parent is someone who is aware of the unhealthy experience that they had in their family, and they are intentional about creating a healthy experience for their children. So when we hear the word healed, it does not mean perfect, okay? Healed does not mean perfect. A great visual or an example of this, and I thank the Holy Spirit for giving this to me in my show notes. A good example of this is, think about a scab healing on your body, right? Your skin may never look exactly the same as it did before the scar, but the scar is evidence of the journey that your skin went through to be healed. So the scar is also there as a reminder of the pain or the experience that caused you to get the scar in the first place. There is a story or a testimony behind the scar. The scar serves as a point of reference to the lesson that you learned from when you got hurt. Y'all, that was so good to me. I believe all of us, and however many years we've been living, have some type of a scar on our body that we can go back and tell you the story of how we got that scar. I know I specifically have a burn on my inner leg, and I don't know how old I was, maybe about 10 or 12. My mom had ran in the store, and for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to burn the lighter. I wanted to burn the straw with the lighter in the car. So as I'm burning the straw, I didn't realize that the wax was melting, and it ended up falling on my leg. Y'all, this burn on my leg, it had to be like a 2nd-degree burn because, again, the scar is still there. But I was in so much pain, and I was trying to cover up or like wipe the wax off of my leg. And I ended up like wiping my skin because it had burned. So I had a burn on my finger. My leg was burned. And would y'all believe that to this day, I don't think my mama knows about this. Y'all, I was sitting in the in the front seat, dying of pain, covering my legs so she wouldn't see it, like, because I knew I wasn't supposed to have the lighter in the first place. But till this day, here I am, 32 years old, and I still have that scar. So there is history with that scar. There was a lesson learned behind that scar. And even though my skin is healed, it doesn't look the same as it did before that happened. But I have a testimony, and I've learned the lesson behind it. Leave lighters alone and don't burn straws anymore, okay? So that's what it looks like to be a healed parent, right? When we hear healed, I don't want you to think that you're perfect and everything is fixed and everything is okay. You've just learned from your past experience with your parents, right? And the scar is still there. Your experience is still your experience. But in you being healed, you are learning from that experience and using those lessons that you learned with your family or your children today. So when it comes to this whole healed parenting journey, I feel like a lot of us as millennials are on a healed parenting journey, right? And very rightfully so, because in our era, we have more resources and information to access that will help us heal. I feel like millennials are more open to go into therapy. There's a lot of conversation around the topic of different parenting styles and the experiences that we had with our parents that may not have been healthy. We are learning who our parents are as women and men versus just mom and dad. That's a huge key to healing. And overall, I just feel like we as millennials understand that there's a lot of layers when it comes to parenting, right? It's not just feeding your kids, giving them somewhere to live and putting clothes on their back. Like, there's a lot of layers to parenting, and it goes so much deeper than just survival or taking care of our kids. So I am very passionate about this topic. If you do not know, Mom Keys to Mental Peace podcast is a spinoff from a book that I wrote in 2020 called Mom Keys to Mental Peace, 12 Tips to Become a Healthy Mom and Raise Healthy Children. So in the foundation of me writing this book, I just had the realization that in order to be a healthy mom, you must first be a healthy woman. And this goes back to the point that I shared where we are learning who our parents were as men and women before mom and dad, right? A lot of our parents were not able to show up the best as mom and dad because they were not healed as a woman and man before they became a parent. So it's important that we heal the woman in us, so we heal the hurt little girl or the hurt little boy in us before stepping into parenthood, right? As a result of that, then we can be a healthy parent. We can be a healthy mother. And as a result of that, we're able to raise healthy children. So that's kind of like the formula or the hierarchy to that. If you are not a healthy woman first, you will not be a healthy mother, period. There's no way around it. So today I have 4 ways to parent from a healed place. And like I said, today's episode is part 1. And next week I'll do part 2. I'll have 4 more ways to share. All right. So the first way to parent from a healed place is recognizing generational patterns and breaking free from them. All right. Let's break this down. What does it mean to recognize something? It means that you acknowledge the existence of something. The first step to healing is acknowledgement. Think about AA when people go for addiction, with alcohol or drugs or any type of therapy. The first step is acknowledgement and acceptance, right? Acknowledging that something is actually going on, or admitting the existence of truth, or confessing. All right. So let's go back to this first point, recognizing the generational patterns. So what is a pattern? I thought that the definition of this just really highlighted what we experience in our lives. So a pattern is a form or model proposed for imitation. It's something used as a model for making things. All right. So a model, think about the term a role model. This is supposed to be somebody that you look up to copy or imitate their behavior, right? So when it comes to generational patterns, we have seen a model. We have seen a pattern of behaviors modeled before us. And we have picked up those patterns or started to imitate those behaviors or those patterns that we saw in our parents with our children and our families, right? So if it's something that's unhealthy, we need to recognize that so that we can stop doing that. If it's something healthy, then good. We need to recognize that so we can continue doing that, right? But when it goes going back to that acknowledgement, sometimes, y'all, we can be in denial about unhealthy generational patterns in our family and just see these behaviors as normal. Y'all, I saw a meme not too long ago on Instagram that really explained this really good. And the title of it was Family Patterns That We Think Are Normal That Are Actually Signs of Dysfunction. One of them is moving on by pretending like nothing happened. I for sure experienced that in my family. And that was something I realized was happening in my marriage. Again, that was the model that we had saw. And it needed to be acknowledged and addressed. Like, hey, we got into a heated argument last night, and here we are this next day just moving on like absolutely nothing has happened. We need to revisit this and address what happened or talk about it. And this was, again, something we just saw as normal, but I started to realize, hey, that's not healthy to just act like that didn't just happen. Like, we need to address this. Another one is staying silent when things need to be addressed. So that tension in the room, or just not saying anything, but you feel the energy in the room is off and you're just not going to address it. Or in another term, sweeping things under the rug. That is dysfunctional and it is not normal. Always having to be the bigger person. Another one is having to walk on eggshells because someone can't manage their emotions. That's a huge one. And the last one was pleasing the person with the most dysfunction to keep the peace. So that goes back to, walking on the eggshells. Well, don't bring that up to him. Don't say nothing to him. And I think the umbrella term for all of this is just sweeping things under the rug and never addressing anything. Pretty much putting a Band-Aid over a huge shark bite or a huge wound that's not really healing or doing anything, right? And remember, when we go back to the definition of healing, it is to, let me go back up, to mend or to restore. So when you don't address these things, nothing is being mended, nothing is being restored, it's just being ignored, right? And people are bleeding out on each other, getting infected from open wounds, which causes toxicity and dysfunction in families. So I hope that you were able to really grasp onto that visual. So, I present the question to you, what patterns do you notice in your family that are unhealthy, specifically when it comes to parenting? For me, there are several, but I'm going to share 3. So one pattern that I noticed in my family is favoritism. And I actually want to do a podcast on this when it comes to parents or moms of multiples, because it's very easy to fall into this trap. And this goes back all the way in biblical times. I've been studying the book of Genesis, and I started at the end with the story of Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, and how they were jealous of him because he was the favorite of his father. And it was just, so as I read that, I started at the end of Genesis and then started going backwards. But as I'm reading, I'm seeing in each family line, in each generation, there was this pattern of favoritism of the youngest child and the oldest child feeling a type of way about it. So literally that was the framework for my family. I felt my parents had me when they were a lot older. So my oldest sister on my mom's side was 12 by the time I was born. And as I've shared in past episodes, they already had a strained relationship. But I remember my oldest sister saying things like, you're mommy's favorite, or she treats you better than me, or she doesn't treat me the way she treats you. She don't like me, but she like you. And me as a kid, I'm hearing these things like, girl, what is you talking about? Like, mommy loves both of us. Like, what do you mean? But the older I got, I was able to see the discrepancy in how my mom responded to me about certain things versus my older sister, or how my mom treated me about certain things versus my older sister. And then my older sister has 2 girls, so I have 2 nieces. And literally, their relationship is a copy and paste generational pattern, a model to imitate, right, of my sister, my mom, and me. So my sister treats my youngest daughter way better than she treats my older, my sister treats her youngest daughter way better than she treats her oldest daughter. There we go. And it's like very plain and blatant and in your face, like it's no denying it at all. And I was just kind of like, God, like, what is this? And I have 3 children, and my oldest and middle child are 7 years apart. But that was something that I was aware of. Like, I was like, God, I don't want to start treating my oldest child funny or different just because I have this baby. So I was very intentional about not showing favoritism or not treating my oldest child a different way or dismissing him just to give all this attention to my youngest child. And there is a season like that newborn stage where the baby does, need a little more attention than the older children. But I knew I didn't want to stay there long term, and I wanted to be intentional about giving my oldest son attention and spending time with him and showing him like, you are still loved, you are still acknowledged, I see you, like you matter to me. Another generational pattern I noticed is lack of emotional involvement. So I can remember being as young as like 5 or 6 years old and feeling awkward saying I love you to people, right? Specifically my parents. So that wasn't something that we said to each other. We didn't physically like hug each other. There was no like emotional involvement. I can remember, expressing things to my parents, or I will give this example. Specifically, there was a time around when my stepfather passed away, and I can remember meeting up with my mom like moments after he passed, and I was like fighting back tears to cry in front of her. Like, keep in mind, this is death. Like, someone has passed away. If any time is okay to cry, this should be the time. But I just felt like stunted to cry, or like I didn't, and she didn't either. Like, we just did not cry together or in front of each other. My father lives in DC. Anytime that I visit him as an adult, I've like tried to, hug him when I see him. This kind of like that little side pat, like, hey, good to see you. So it was just like emotional connection or involvement was not something that we did. And the last pattern that I noticed is a laissez-faire type of parenting style. So this is a parenting style where parents allow their children to do as they please without clear boundaries or directions. This style can help children learn to manage themselves, but they may have trouble with a sense of belonging and limits. Y'all, if that doesn't describe my life, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I was a teen mom because there were no boundaries put in place for my life as a teenager. If I wanted to go over a friend's house, or my husband, who at the time was my boyfriend, if I wanted to go over his house, it was nothing, right? It was nothing for me to go where I wanted, to do what I wanted to do, which I've shared before. This is why I felt like at 16 years old, I was an adult, like just because of the way that I moved about. So as an adult now, like, I'm very independent, I'm very self-sufficient, but at the same time, I lack boundaries and limits because for so long I was able to do what I wanted to do because of this type of parenting style. So I noticed this with my sister and her girls. They got to do whatever they wanted to do. And that's something I'm trying to be intentional about with my children. Like, I put boundaries in place for my oldest son, and I explained to him why the boundaries were in place. And then I'll even share and say, I wish someone told me no about XYZ, or I wish there was a boundary put in place for me when it came to this particular thing, because I just was able to do what I wanted. And the same thing for my husband as well. Like, as a teenager, he kind of came and went as he wanted to. His mother was in jail, during his teenage years, and his grandmother was sick and in a nursing home. So literally, y'all, we were out here real life feeling like we were adults and that we were grown. But now as I'm older and I look back at it, I see that it was just a laissez-faire type of parenting style. Okay. So that's the first step, is to recognize the generational patterns and breaking free from them, doing something different from the unhealthy ones. All right. The second step to parenting from a healed place is understanding your own emotional needs and how they impact parenting. This helps you to avoid trying to fill your own emotional voids through your children's achievements and behaviors. This is something I feel like we don't talk about enough. So if y'all go back to some episodes on the podcast, I did an episode just sharing my reviews on Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. And if you're a millennial, you know about iCarly. Jeanette McCurdy was the friend on iCarly. Sam, I believe, was her name. So this was a book about a memoir about her life with her mom. And pretty much in that book, her mom was living through her in regards to her acting career. Jeanette shared how her mom wanted to be an actress when she was younger, but her mom never let her. So whenever Jeanette was born, like she literally lived her life through her daughter and saw this as an opportunity to relive on that opportunity that she missed out on as a kid. Okay. This is not healthy, right? That is not healthy by living and trying to fulfill your emotional needs through your child's achievement. Another example of this I see a lot. My son plays AAU sports, so he's been doing this since about 5 years old. So I see a lot when it comes to coaches and parents and dads. But another example of this is a father who forces his son to play sports because he was not able to fulfill his dream to become a professional athlete. This is where you see parents pushing their children to sign up and do things that their heart isn't necessarily in, but the parent is trying to fulfill what they weren't able to accomplish in their childhood through their children. So that's when you start to see resentment, frustration, and anger, and the parent pushing the child not really having a life or a say in what they want to do. And then there's this anger and resentment that is built up, and it starts to deteriorate and break the relationship over time. This is another one that is not talked about enough. A single mom who treats her son like they are in a romantic relationship without the intimacy. Now, I speak on this topic from experience and not judgment. You know, I had my oldest son when I was 16, and his father and I were in a very toxic relationship, going back and forth with drama. But I will say, when I had my son, something in my mind was like, well, here's a man that will love me unconditionally. Here's a man that I know that I can depend on to love me and show me love. And I, in my mind, kind of, I would say, treated him like a little boyfriend. Like, it's weird, right? But I feel like a lot of women, if they don't catch it, they start to grow up. The boys grow up and it's like this weird relationship, right, with their son, where it's almost like their son is their man. And the way that they talk about them and interact with their son and do for their son, it's like a grown man child, right? And then these boys get with women and expect these women to treat them like their mother. But there's been a distortion in their brain where, yes, we can have this romantic connection, but you also have to take care of me like my mom does. And no. That is unhealthy. And that's something that I'm glad God revealed to me early so that I could correct it. Now, granted, you know, me and his father, we are married now, so that is my romantic partner. But whenever we were rocky, like, that hurt me, and it was irritating and frustrating to me that I didn't have that family unit. So it was like I tried to build that or fill that space up with the love from my son. So again, y'all, that's not healthy. And in the long run, it's not healthy for your son to have that dynamic of a relationship. There's a lot of women that I know today who are dealing with grown men, mama's boys. And it's like, I ain't gonna say nothing's impossible, because nothing is impossible with God. Some of those men, it's just very difficult, it seems like, for them to break free from it. And that's where you get the toxic mother-in-law relationships, or she's overstepping her boundaries and things like that. Like, those are signs that there's a distortion in the relationship with that mother and son, and it's not healthy. All right. And the last example of this goes for mamas too. Sometimes they can be out of line, but moms who become best friends with their daughters and tell them all of their personal business that is not appropriate or suitable for a child. This was something that Jeanette McCurdy touched on in her book as well, pointing out how her mom didn't have any friends, and how the mom would come to her talking about drama with her dad, like cheating on her and all this stuff. Like, that is completely inappropriate to share what's going on between you and your husband with your child, right? Like, that's still their dad. Or even if it's not their dad, just a man that you're romantically involved with. I don't think a conversation with your daughter or your child in regards to that is appropriate, right? Get you some adult women that you can pour and share that type of information with. So those are just a few examples that I think of when I hear, you know, to understand your own emotional needs and how that will impact your parenting with your children. So some things you can do, y'all, instead of that, is consult with a therapist. You can go to God in prayer or begin to do research on what you lack emotionally so that it doesn't negatively impact your relationship with your children. Our emotional tanks need to be filled before we can pour into our children. As we receive love, care, and support from ourselves, we're better equipped to give it to our children. So this goes back to my main point at the beginning. If you are not a healthy woman, if you are not a healthy man, there's no way you can be a healthy parent. It's just not going to carry over. It's not going to make sense, okay? All right. The third tip for parenting from a healed place is parenting from abundance, not lack or fear. Okay, so let's break this down. What does abundant mean? It means existing or available in large quantities, plentiful. And the opposite of that is lack, which is the state of being without or not enough of something. So there are scriptures that warn against parenting from lack or fear. The first one is Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, and I'm going to read this in the Message version. Fathers, don't frustrate your children with a no-win scenarios. Take them by the hand and lead them in the way of the master. Y'all, so I feel like sometimes when you're not parenting from a healed place, and I'm going to go into some examples later on, but when you're not parenting from a healed place, you can overcorrect or be overbearing when it comes to parenting your children to where, as the scripture says, it's like you put them in a no-win situation. Like, it don't matter if they do what you say or if they do what you don't say. Like, you're still upset with them. You're still pushing them or yelling at them or getting on them or nagging about something. Like, it's just like a suffocating relationship or a suffocating environment. And the Lord warns us against this. Don't frustrate your children with a no-win scenario. Instead, take them by the hand and lead them in the way of the master. So this is where I feel like, and I want to do an episode on this, parenting is like a form of discipleship, right? Or a type of coaching where you come alongside your children and you walk alongside with them or teach them along the way. Ooh, you made a mistake here. Okay, let's talk about how we can do better with this next time, instead of being overbearing on them or attacking them and suffocating them and making them feel bad for mistakes that they make. We are grown adults out here still making mistakes. And that's something that God, I feel like, is still trying to teach me in my life. Like, girl, you're human. Girl, you're going to make a mistake. Not too long ago, I hadn't baked in a while. Somebody ordered some cookies. And a dozen is $20, half a dozen is $10. Y'all, they ordered 3 dozen cookies, and I told them that their total was $30. And, I went on about it. But the day that I went to get the ingredients and I was making it, I was like, dang, y'all, man, I told them the wrong price for these cookies. And I was so frustrated by that mistake. Like, why did I do that? Like, and I'm not going to go back and say, actually, you owe me $30 extra. Like, girl, you made a mistake. You messed up. But I can think back in my childhood, like, when it came to mistakes, my father would get he would get on 10 for mistakes. He would get really, really frustrated if a mistake was made. So I feel like that's something that I'm still having to heal from and teaching adult me, like, it's okay to make mistakes. And I realize I show up that way with my kids. If my children spill something or break something or cause any type of an inconvenience, it's just like this rage or an alarm goes off inside of me. So that's something that I'm trying to be more aware about and letting my children know it's okay to make a mistake. Even my oldest son, he plays football. There are times, like the most recent game they had, he made a few mistakes out on the field. And he's like hitting himself in the helmet. You can hear him from the stands, like, just the level of frustration. And it's like, okay, God, I see this. Can you please heal us as a whole in this area to where we are okay with making mistakes? Whatever this spirit is hovering over us that is frustrating us or making us feel like we can't mess up, please remove it from our hearts, right? And give us that grace to have with ourselves and each other. Another scripture that warns against this is Colossians chapter 3, verse 21. And I'm going to read it in the NLT version. Fathers, do not aggravate your children or they will become discouraged. So A lot of times children will just give up or not want to continue trying because it's like nothing they do is right, or nothing they do pleases their parents. And ultimately that's a unhealthy message to teach our children. The only person that we should be wanting to please is God, right? Our children and us. If God is telling our children to do something that contradicts what we want them to do, God trumps us, period. So that message of you have to do what I say, or you have to please me, or you have to meet my standards is kind of a unhealthy message to teach our children, especially as believers. We need to teach them to give that energy to God, right? Am I pleasing God? Am I doing what he asked me to do? Am I doing what he wants me to do? Am I in alignment with his will, not us as parents? Because at the end of the day, children are a gift to us. God gave them to us to steward over, but ultimately they are his, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. So I'm going to go through with a few examples of what it looks like to parent from abundance versus what it looks like to parent from lack, okay? So I'm going to start with parenting from abundance. You trust in your child's capabilities and potential. You focus on nurturing and guiding rather than controlling and fixing. So we touched on that. You encourage independence. You practice empathy and understanding rather than fear and judgment. You offer choices and involve your children in decision making. You emphasize effort and progress over achievements and outcome. You cultivate a growth mindset, embracing challenges and mistakes. You prioritize connection and relationship over compliance and obedience. I just want to put a pin here because I feel like this is that old school style of parenting where children are seen and not heard, and you do as I say and not what I do, and just follow rules. Like no type of relationship, no type of connection, just do as I say and obey what I say. But if we will be honest as adults, when it comes to God the Father, and he tells us to do stuff, we don't be listening to him, right? We don't be just obeying and doing what he say, even though that's what we should be doing when it comes to God, right? But we expect that from our children, but we don't model it. We don't give the generational pattern of what that looks like to live a life of obedience and submission. And in order to obey or submit to someone, you have to have a relationship with them first, right? If it's just do what I say, that's domineering, and it makes you start to feel discouraged, as the scripture said before. Don't let me go specifically to it. Don't aggravate your children. That's aggravating. Someone just constantly telling you what to do, and you need to listen to me and you need to obey to me, but you don't have a relationship with them. That can cause discouragement. Another one is that you foster dependence and reliance on authority. Oh, wait. No, I got ahead of myself. Not that one. Let me go back to the abundant. Okay, so the last one is that you prioritize connection and relationship over compliance and obedience. You foster a sense of safety and security, allowing children to take risks. And last, you celebrate individuality and uniqueness. So you don't feel like your children are mini yous out here having to live out the life that you mapped out for them to live, or that you want them to live. All right. Now, some examples of what it looks like to parent from lack or fear. This focuses on avoiding mistakes and failures. You try to control and manipulate behavior. You emphasize achievements and outcomes over effort and progress. You use fear, guilt, and shame to motivate. You see children as an extension of yourself rather than individuals. You prioritize obedience and compliance over connection and relationship. You foster dependence and reliance on authority. I want to put a pin on this one here. A good example of this, I had a friend who was doing my hair, and her little brother plays for AAU baseball. He's in high school, like 15 years old. And they were talking about a kid on his team who his mom is really kind of like overbearing and overprotective of him. She gave the example like the kids were like running on the bleachers or doing something on the bleachers, like hopping or skipping. And the mom like yelled across the bleachers at this kid to get down before he hurts himself. And matter of fact, just come and sit down beside me. Again, these are 15 and 16-year-olds. Like this kid is in high school. So here, this parent or this mom is parenting out of fear. And again, fosters dependence and reliance on authority. That said that she like puts on his uniform stuff for him, will like wipe and clean his face in public in front of people. And it's just kind of like, it's awkward for him. They say he doesn't like it, but it's awkward for them. But she's doing this from a place of fear that him at his big age still needs her to do these things for him. And he's not special needs or anything. I feel like that's a different case, right? But it's just like, it starts to become awkward or not normal. So allow your children to have some type of individuality or independence. But when you foster dependence and reliance on authority, like that's the point I'm getting at. Like she wants him to rely on her. She wants him to have to depend on her at this big age. That's not healthy. And last, when parenting from a place of fear, is that you emphasize what's lacking or what's going wrong. So always pointing out what's wrong, always pointing out where they're falling short. I saw an example of this on Instagram and I was convicted, where a mom shared like she realized that her conversation with her teenage son was him needing to clean his room, him needing to do better in school. He needs to do this. He needs to do that, blah, 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 blah. And she said she realized it got to the point like where he barely even wanted to talk to her. Or as they're pulling up to school, like these are the topics they're having about where he's lacking or how he's not sufficient in this area, to where he didn't even want to tell her bye getting out the car. And she said it kind of convicted her, especially like life, y'all, can go at the snap of our fingers. Like we never know what is going to happen. And to think that your last moments were bickering or bringing something up that was minuscule. And that's something that I've thought about in regards to parenting and with my husband. I'm like very particular about the home being clean, being organized. And I feel like God kind of, presented the question to me like, is this something worth getting bent out of shape over if it won't matter on your deathbed, right? So if I'm laying on my deathbed, am I going to be worried about socks being left in the living room or a plate being left on the sink and you could have washed it? Like, are these things going to matter to me on my deathbed? So not saying to, dismiss or not have, requirements for cleanliness and organization, but the level of anger that I be having over this stuff, like, is it really worth it? And the answer is no. Okay. So one last tip for this: God parents us from an abundant place, right? Freely you have received, so freely you give. That's Matthew 10:8. Looking at God as our Father. I mean, He has new mercies every morning. We did an episode not too long ago on don't take advantage of God's grace. And I mentioned how God's mercies are like the waves that come on the ocean. Think about how frequent waves flow. God tells us to forgive 70 times 7. So if God can parent us from an abundant place, as freely as we receive from Him, we need to have that posture to give that level of grace to our children as well. Okay. And then the last point for parenting from a healed place is, all right, y'all. This one is good. Giving children what they need, not what you never had. I'm going to say it again. Giving children what they need, not what you never had. All right? I'm going to hold your hands gently on this one. Okay, sis? Give me your hands. Out of good intentions, we make certain promises about how we will parent based off our experience with our parents. So we say things like, I'm going to give my kids everything I never had. I'm never yelling at my kids like my parents yelled at me. I'll never be as strict to my kids as my parents were with me. I'll always attend your events and be present, unlike my parents were with me. So these Promises come from the desire to correct past hurts or injustices, to provide a better childhood experience, to avoid repeating negative patterns, and to show love and dedication. So, there is nothing wrong with this, but this can't be the motivating factor of your parenting, okay? So, I heard a quote, and I was trying to find it. I could not go back. There's a pastor called Jerry Flowers Jr. on YouTube where he pointed out with generational patterns how, like, we point out or we acknowledge the unhealthy patterns, right, or something unhealthy, and then we make that promise that, oh, I'm never going to do that. Okay, cool. But you have to do something else, right, to make up for that space in between. You can't just decide, I'm not going to do it. Okay, well, what are you going to replace it with moving forward? So, I'm going to go and break down what the consequences of giving children what you never had, okay? This projects your unfulfilled desires or dreams onto your children. We touched on this earlier. This focuses on material possessions or external validation rather than emotional support. How many times have we heard about parents giving their children all of these things, all these clothes, shoes, big house, material things, but they were never present or they were never there with their kids because they were always at work, earning the bag, getting the money to provide this lifestyle that they never had or that they always wanted. So they're going to give their deepest desires to their children, all to find out at the end of their life that their children are unfulfilled, did not feel loved or seen by their parents, and were not their emotional needs were not met because all they had was materialism or material things. And y'all, I feel like this is something that we should all be a little more aware about. I feel like this was the case for my family. Like my parents were very materialistic. I mean, there was nothing that we didn't have. Excuse me. We were always shopping. We were always going out to eat. We were always doing fun activities and doing things, but would come home and everybody be in their own room and nobody talked to each other. Nobody saying anything to each other. Like I shared, we barely even said, I love you, or hugged and embraced each other. Like it was all just about material things and external validation, right? There was no type of emotional support. So that's something that I'm trying to be very intentional about with my children. When it comes to like shopping or Christmas, like I'm a what we need type of person. My kids know about my list, my running list that I make of things that we need. If it ain't on the list, I ain't buying it. We don't get a bunch of toys. We don't buy a bunch of different shoes. Now, I started off that way with my oldest son. Child, he had every Jordan out that would come out. We were always going shopping with him. His room was full of toys. His closet was full of clothes. Like, that is the path and the journey that I started on until I realized, like, these material things don't mean nothing because I was replicating or doing the pattern of what I saw with my parents. He had all this stuff, but we weren't interacting with each other. We didn't have a bond or an emotional connection with each other. And that's something that matters to me more than anything. Like, what I keep in mind is I still want my children as adults to want to be around me, to want to call me, to want to visit me, to want to have a relationship with me. Because I don't have that right now based off how things were with my parents when I was a kid. So I'm thinking forward in regards to this. And I know that a bunch of stuff, a closet full of stuff, a house full of stuff, a room full of stuff is not going to fill the emotional void or the emotional connection that really is more important than any material possession ever. All right. So keep that in mind, y'all, when it comes to this. Giving children what they never had can result in seeking to recreate your own childhood experiences rather than creating new ones for them. Okay? And to highlight on this, our children are not us. Okay? Our children are not us. They live in a different time and have different circumstances than we did. All right? One example of this, and I hope my husband doesn't mind me sharing this, but When it came to my husband and my son, I noticed a pattern with him. So my husband's father was not present in his life. He left his mom and him when he was around 2. So, and my husband was big into sports and athletics. So his father wasn't really present at his games. His father wasn't really present to help him in the training process and moving forward with his athletic career. And as a result of him being a teen dad with my oldest son and unfortunate events with like his mom in high school, he didn't go forward with going off to play sports in school. So I noticed my husband's approach with our oldest son was very athletic geared, right? Like whenever they interacted the most, it was when a practice was going on or a game was going on or some type of training. And he was like pushing my son really, really hard and signing him up for all this stuff. And just, it almost seemed like he was living his life through our son, right? And like I said, I've experienced AAU sports for so long. And it was a lot of dads that from their energy on the field and how they were acting, you could tell like, you feel like this is you out here. This is your child. So also, I realized that my husband took pride in being present. Like, I'm at the games, I'm at the practices, I'm with you at the training. But it seemed like outside of that, there wasn't really, much of a connection. It was like my husband would go off and do his own thing. But when it came to sports, it was like, oh, I got you, I'm here. So we had to have the conversation like, and keep in mind, my husband has been present since we had our son in high school, since we were 16, 17 years old. Like he's been present. So I know that my husband takes pride in that. And I'm so grateful that he has been present all of these years. But kind of like I shared before, it's like, okay, your dad wasn't there, but now you are. And that's good. But there's other things that are needed from you as a parent, or there are different needs that your son needs. So yes, you're here, but what about the emotional support, right? What about the guidance and the walking alongside and the correction when it comes to academics or friendships or different areas in his life? Like, it's a bigger picture than sports. I know you were upset that your dad wasn't there for your games and things, but you are. Like, boom, check, we got that. But what other areas can you show up in? And I'm grateful that my husband was able to receive that. And I see a change in the dynamic of his relationship. Like, the scales have been removed from his eyes and revelation has happened. And even recently, my husband just celebrated his 33rd birthday. His father reached out to him via text and just expressed like, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the father that you are to your children and how you have stepped up. And I apologize that I was not able to be there for you, but I'm proud of you for you stepping up and taking the bar and running further than I ever did when it comes to this fatherhood journey. And my husband is not a very sentimental man or expresses like his emotions, but when he shared that to me, I could tell like that meant something to him, right? That there is healing happening in that area. So again, healing doesn't mean perfect. It doesn't mean everything has gone away, but I feel like that scar is starting to heal, or that wound is starting to heal and turn into a scar to where he can reflect on it as he moves forward with his son. So yes, y'all, that is all I have. And in conclusion, I just want to share some points. Parenting from a healed place is a journey, y'all, and it's okay to grow and learn alongside your children. We're all learning how to do this thing, right? Some of us, we didn't have it, so we're one of the first ones trying to establish some type of healthy, healing parenting and relationships with our children. You can create healthier generational patterns that they can implement with their families. You can provide them with the tools that they need to add more healthier patterns to their families as they get older, okay? Overall, we are redesigning the pattern, okay? So I have 4 reflection questions for you, and each one touches on the point that I shared today. First, I want you to identify healthy and unhealthy generational patterns that have been passed down in your family. Identify your own emotional needs and examine how they're being fulfilled. Are you parenting from a place of abundance or lack and fear? And are you giving your children what they need or what you never had? All right. So that is all that I have for you all today. Thank you so much for tuning in with me. Be sure to follow me on social media, sign up for the email list, subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you listen to, as well as the YouTube channel to watch the video. And be sure to rate the show, share, leave a review. I ain't seen no reviews in a minute. Where y'all at, sis? Go do that now as soon as you finish this episode, okay? So I can shout you out on the next episode, okay? So be sure to come back for part 2 of Parenting from a Healed Place, and I will talk to you all then. Bye.